talk about a cliff edge. Should the EU be worrying about a no-deal Brexit or the general state of one of the world's oldest liberal democracies? Wednesday's session of the UK Parliament was billed as the day lawmakers would take control of the process from the Prime Minister. So how did that go? Well, MPs striking down a series of indicative votes on the way forward. Theresa May's Brexit secretary tried to spin it as meaning her divorce deal is the only option, but even the promise to her backbench that she'll stand down if they back her deal does not yet seem to rally enough votes for Friday's third time round for her, this time her truncated divorce deal. More on that in a moment. So what next if she can't get it through? A snap general election? Would that even clear the air? And what about the rest of Europe? The EU's got plenty of other pressing business. Can the other 27 move on? Particularly when Remainers in the UK are clamoring more and more loudly for a second referendum. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at, well, I guess you could call it the leadership crisis at Westminster. Joining us, INSEAD Business School political science professor Douglas Weber. Your new book, Europe Disintegration, with a question mark, the politics of crisis in the European Union. Thanks for joining us. Thanks as well to barrister Duncan Fairgrieve, who teaches comparative law at the University of Paris Dauphine. Welcome to the show. Welcome from London. We welcome back Andre Walker, columnist for the New York Observer. And socialist Hélène Conway-Mouret, Vice President of the French Senate, is with us as well. How are you?
Hello.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. The state of play in 7 seconds as seen from the continent. Here goes.
We counted 8 no's last night. Now we need a yes on the way forward.
So all eyes on Westminster. And there are more theatrics in store Friday after news that the Speaker of Parliament has okayed a third vote on Theresa May's divorce deal, this time leaving out the political statement that was to set guidelines for future trade talks with the EU.
I am pleased to report to the House that the government's motion for tomorrow's debate complies with the tests set out in the 24th edition of Erskine May on page 397, that motions which are the same or substantially the same must not be put to the House more than once in a parliamentary session. The previous meaningful vote motion encompassed both the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. This motion covers the former but not the latter. In short, the motion is new, substantially different, and in conformity with the requirements of my ruling of the 18th of March, reiterated on the 25th and 27th of March.
So, Duncan Fairgrieve, we played a rather long clip because a lot of us are a little lost sometimes following procedure and the intricacies of all this. You heard him say that it is substantially new. You agree with that?
It's certainly different, but it's different in the sense it's half of what was voted on before. It's a different package which has been put to Parliament. Whether it is actually a meaningful vote for the whole package is a different question. I think it may satisfy the European Commission if it gets through, and allow for the deadline to be pushed back. But I think I think it's open to criticism, and I think Keir Starmer, the opposition Brexit secretary, has said referred to it as a blind Brexit, i.e. divorce without knowing what the next steps are. And I think we're going to hear in the next few hours and days.
Well, let's cut to the chase, because the crucial question, the one that's stopping the coalition partners of the government, the DUP, from voting, is this issue of the backstop of what happens with the border with Ireland. What are they voting on then tomorrow when it comes to the backstop?
And the backstop will still be there. The withdrawal agreement is not going to change, and that's certainly what the Commission has made that very clear now. So, it's open. The Speaker has allowed the vote to occur, but that doesn't mean that the votes are there for the Prime Minister to get this new version through. the MV 2.5, it's been called now. I'm not at all sure that the votes are there. The DUP were very clear last night that they couldn't support the withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal agreement hasn't changed. So unless there are some last minute tonight deals, which can occur, they often do, then I think it's that they're not going to have the DUP's votes. And the problem is for the government is there are a number of Brexiters who have now linked themselves to the DUP train in the sense that they've said that they will not vote in favour of...
They'll vote yes if the DUP votes yes.
That's right, yeah.
And
so the DUP becomes...
So can she get the votes elsewhere? Can she get the votes from
the Labour Party?
Yeah.
I mean, she has had a number of votes from the Labour Party in the past, an MV2. She got a few. I think it's open to debate as to how many will actually are likely to follow.
Andre Walker, how good are you at head counting?
I think I'm good enough to agree with your previous speaker to say that the votes simply aren't there. I think we need to take a step back when we look at what's going on at the moment in Westminster. Bear in mind, Britain's chief negotiator, Ollie Robbins, at university, was a member of a European Federalist society. He's Guy Verhofstadt, only the less ugly version. And so essentially, the proposal has always been about the European Commission making the run and Britain's negotiators simply agreeing. We've always said, as British Eurosceptics and Brexiteers, that you cannot divorce the divorce settlements from the future relationship. Nonetheless, that is precisely what British negotiators agreed with Michel Barnier. And so the paralysis that you see in London at the moment is that there is an insistence by the European Union and indeed by Theresa May and her awful negotiator, Ollie Robbins, that we agree the withdrawal first before we agree the future relations. And look, the difficulty is this, that people have called the withdrawal agreement Britain's Treaty of Versailles, or 39 billion, not for a trade deal, but to negotiate the negotiations on the trade deal. If the EU doesn't agree the trade deal, then Northern Ireland becomes effectively annexed by the European Union. It is absolute madness, this deal. What we needed to do from day one was to say our departure from the EU is inextricably linked to our future relationship with the EU. Now, of course, it's really easy for somebody like me. All I say is that we leave with no deal and our future relationship is based on the World Trade Organization rules. But of course, that's not what the European Union wants, and it's not what the British government wants. But the idea that you can have this divorce settlement, as it's so-called, without a future relationship, it never works. It never is going to work. It never has worked. It was madness on the part of Michel Barnier to propose it. But actually, it's his job. But to be fair, it's not Michel Barnier's fault. It's the fault of the stupidity, naivety of the British government.
Ilan Conway-Mouret, what is the EU imposing, wishing? What will they think, by the way, if there is a positive vote against the odds, if we listen to our two previous speakers, for this divorce deal without the political statement? How will that go down, do you think, in Brussels? How will it go down with you?
Well, I mean, just what I heard, I failed to understand, that we can go for a kind of lose-lose kind of deal. This is what is being proposed by the previous speaker here, to say that, it's better to have no deal and then we will see. I think there are a number of problems. I believe that Theresa May made the mistake not to be transparent and not having debates within her own parliament with a number of MPs and lords who were at a loss and have discovered a package, in effect, that was negotiated without them. We have to remember this is a parliamentary democracy. And now we have a parliament which is being called upon at the last minute to say, well, this is what you need to vote on, and that's it. So I think we've kind of moved away from the traditions of Britain with the referendum that was imposed, on the parliament as well. This is not the way that country works. And now, of course, we have people who are at a loss to try to negotiate, or not negotiate, but to move forward and see what will happen afterwards. Now, I think that Michel Barnier has done something very good, which is, first of all, to have the unity of the 27, which is not what Britain counted on. I think Britain counted on a divided Europe where they would be passing deals on a bilateral basis with, the various countries. And now they realize that, in fact, they have a block with the single market, which they are going to be out of in the future. And what Michel Barnier is counting on is to say, well, we have a deal, and then you are going to have a new government. When Theresa May is going to go, there will be an election, and who knows who is going to be in charge then afterwards. So
what happened? All right, so
how could he pass a deal for the after of the deal being voted or agreed between the two parties, having then to deal with people who might want to renegotiate the whole thing? So, I mean, it's impossible. I think we need to take it step by step.
So how do you do it?
There is a deal that has been negotiated. The British people accept it or not. If they don't, well, then there is no deal. And of course, we're all at a loss to know where we will go afterwards. But if the deal that has been negotiated is voted, then the next step is then to see what will come with the next government and what the British people will want afterwards. But I think we have to take it step by step.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. This is completely, I think, unreasonable and the basis of the problems that you see in Westminster. Look, what does the European Union want from us? The European Union wants guarantees over the Irish border. The European Union wants the 39 billion. Why are we giving away absolutely everything within our negotiating position and getting nothing in return? Look, I think the fair and the reasonable and the sensible position is to say, if you want your 39 billion, we want our trade deal. Why do we have to give you the 39 billion and then you just pocket that and ignore our requirements? That's why the House of Commons can't pass it.
No, just on that, I mean, the Irish Republic cannot be the back door for Chinese, American goods that will be coming into Britain, because the Americans have already moved in to say, well, look, if you're not doing any business with the EU, then we will be your only partner and your sole partner. So, I mean, there are already deals being passed, maybe with, the States or the Chinese or whatever.
But that's not.
One at a time.
I would like to finish, please. And so the Irish Republic cannot be the back door for all these different goods that will be coming, not following the EU norms and EU regulations. And then, of course, being imported throughout the single market, which is the EU market.
All right, let me bring in Douglas Weber on this.
There is an important point here. No, let me just say this, because I think this is an important point. Right, what has just been said on the face of it sounds reasonable, except for the fact that we have had no border aside from a counter-terrorism operation, and we've had a common travel area with Ireland since 1924. The European Union are demanding a hard border under some circumstances.
I'm sorry, but I remember crossing that border, and there were British soldiers, and it was
No. Hang on. Well, can I answer that? Because I think it's important.
That was the hardest border I've ever crossed in Europe.
And I crossed it many times too.
Well, hang on. Do you want to blow this away, or do you want me to answer? It's a really important point. That border was a counter-terrorism operation. What you met were soldiers, as you just said. You didn't meet customs officers. The problem is with the European Union's position on this, by demanding a customs border, they potentially
you're
cause
coming
a war
out of the
in
single
Ireland.
market, and therefore you shouldn't have access to it anymore.
Do not worry about it, Europe. Do not. Hang on. Do not worry about it, Europe. Do not worry about it, France. The Irish government isn't going to build the hard border. The British government isn't going to build the hard border. And God bless the French. I doubt they're going to build it either. So it's never going to happen.
Right, let me bring in Douglas Weber here. Douglas, how did we get to the situation we're at now, where we saw, it was billed as this big day on Wednesday, taking back control. Then we saw those 8 indicative votes where they all said no. They're going to try again, by the way, on Monday. But how did we get to this gridlock?
This is simply, I think, a manifestation or expression of the extreme polarization of opinion in the UK over Brexit. There is simply no single policy or treaty or deal over which in Parliament you can find a majority of the MPs to support it.
How did the context come about, though?
The context, this is, Europe has been a divisive issue in UK politics now for generations. And it came about, of course, through the decision of David Cameron, then Prime Minister, to call a referendum in 2013. I think he announced this when he unexpectedly won a majority in the elections of 2015. He was obliged then to redeem his promise. And since then, of course, we've been trying to find, or Britain and the EU have been trying to find mutually acceptable terms under which Brexit can occur.
And you have this promise on Wednesday by the Prime Minister, vote for my deal and I'll resign. How did we get to that?
This seemed to Theresa May evidently to be the only way that she thought she could go in order to bring on board and to get the support for her deal of the extreme right wing of the Conservative Party in Parliament, plus the Ulster Unionist Party.
Would you say there's a power vacuum of sorts? There's not a power vacuum as such, but I mean,
there is indeed a power vacuum if the Prime Minister hasn't the authority to mobilise a majority of votes for her deal, for her solution to the Brexit issue in the Parliament. Yes, clearly.
You agree with that?
I mean, I just on your point about indicative votes, I don't think we've actually, that saga has yet finished. We're told that on Monday there will be a return to it, and Suella Letwin has said at the time that he didn't expect it to be resolved in one session, yesterday's session. So I think if tomorrow Theresa May is unsuccessful, and it looks likely that will occur, then on Monday we can see a whittling down of the options. So I don't think the struggle between Parliament and the Executive, which we've been seeing now for a number of months, has entirely been resolved. And the power vacuum which has just been described, I think it's natural that the Parliament fills that. That's it's a hung Parliament, it's a minority government. That doesn't happen often in the UK. We don't have much experience of it. But that's what occurs. When you're in minority government, you have to seek consensus. Theresa May has been unable and unwilling to do that. You have to try and convince. She's not been very good at convincing, and through that failure, it's entirely normal that the Parliament should seize the agenda. She should really have done this many months ago, a long time ago. It's a tragedy for the UK that didn't occur, and unfortunately,
right. So
we heard
the question is, what happens?
London.
What
There's a lot of
happens
heat,
now?
but not much light. From Andre.
What happens now going forward, and what happens? How does Europe react? Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and well, like the rest of Europe, we are watching with bated breath what is going on in the Houses of Parliament as another crucial day awaits on Friday. We're talking about it with Douglas Weber, who teaches at INSEAD, the business school outside of Paris. Your new book, European Disintegration, with a question mark. The Politics of Crisis in the European Union. Barrister Duncan Fairgrieve, who teaches at the University of Paris Dauphine. Andre Walker, columnist for the New York Observer, joins us from London. And French Senator Hélène Conway-Mouret of the Socialist Party. You heard just before the break Duncan Fairgrieve mention Britain's in the unusual situation of having effectively a hung parliament. And it's interesting to notice that splintering existing in Spain, existing even in Germany, where the political field is it's not a hung parliament, but it's a more crowded field than before. The overturning of old alliances in Italy. It's all over the continent. It's not just Brexit.
Absolutely. I think, it's what we see is a very sad image of what has been the model of parliamentary democracies, in the world. And the Brexit is the expression of what our democracies are going through at the moment. We have the yellow vests in France, people demonstrating every Saturday, expressing their anger at kind of mismanagement or mishandling of issues that are important to them in terms of education, of accommodation, of work, and so on.
Anger at the elites as well.
Yes, and a split. But I think, it's far more complex, and that we're going to see with the European elections coming, that we do not have a split simply between the nationalists and the progressists. We have a very mixed of various issues, people trying to move forward saying, well, what is in Europe for us? What are you doing for us? We are moving towards democracies that are very individualistic, where people are expressing their own wishes, their own wills. They feel that, that they deserve to have a better life, and they're very worried about a whole lot of things. I mean, just looking at the few images around the world, what is happening, one has every reason to be worried. There is turmoil everywhere. We see the democracies, being under pressure everywhere in the world, with people contesting votes and so on. It's worrying, and people are worried.
Douglas Weber, in those European elections, how much will Brexit be on voters' minds in the other 27 countries?
I don't think it's a major issue for the citizens in other member states, quite frankly. And it's not the only issue on the agenda of the European Union. In other member states, I think primarily the citizens will vote on other issues, and very often they will vote on national issues. And they may use the European elections, as they often have done in the past, to either blame their existing governments for what's gone wrong, or perhaps support them for what they think they have done right. But to come back to the previous comments, what is basically taking place right across Europe is the emergence of a new line of political conflict, primarily between nationalists and internationalists, replacing an old one based primarily on social class or even on religion.
So left versus right is dead, basically, the old divide?
Well, it's certainly not nearly as important as it used to be. And you see the emergence of many new parties for this reason in many EU member states. In the UK, it's more difficult. The UK has an election system which strongly favours the two main political parties. And so, therefore, these two parties are riven themselves by this cleavage and conflict between nationalists and internationalists. So neither the Conservative Party nor Labour has a united position on Brexit. And we see that in all the parliamentary debates that have been taking place over the last few months and before.
Of course, Andre Walker, one of the options available if that gridlock proves too much is a snap general election in the UK. Picking up on Douglas Weber's point, you have that first past the post system. Will the next parliament look like the current one?
Yes, I think it will. If you think about it, 75% of members of the House of Commons voted Remain in the European referendum. The House of Lords is a nest of Euro-federalism. I mean, even the European Parliament would be ashamed about how pro-European they are. I think what one thing that people forget about Britain is this. It's very, very common for people on the continent to say that Britain is doing what it's doing because of some spat within the Conservative Party. Always remember, the EU is not a democratic organisation, but it does have a parliament with some very limited powers. In Britain, at the last European elections, Nigel Farage's United Kingdom Independence Party won the election. Now, remember, beating Labour and Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, all these long established parties. If we, by the way, have a European election on the 23rd of May, his new party, the Brexit Party, will become the predominant force. Now, I used to work at the European Parliament, so I'm not unrealistic about how democratic the EU is. And I'm just going to say one other thing. When we talk about this rise of nationalism and internationalism, I think what you have to understand is what that means in Britain. There is a European nationalist group and there is an internationalist group of people like me who say we want to be part of the world. This idea that you abolish nation states, that you abolish democracy, that you ignore the will of the people, that 75% of laws in Britain are made by an unelected government in Brussels is unacceptable to the British people. Now, I know that the House of Commons and the House of Lords love the EU, are obsessed with it and think it's absolutely fantastic, but the British people really don't. Now, what we do about the fact
lots
that
of points in there. Let's break it
British
down.
People.
Duncan Fairgrave, has the UK given up its sovereignty when it joined the EU in 1975, or what was then the European Common Market?
I mean, in legal terms, there was a transfer of sovereignty in a certain sense. That's true. But I mean, the point that Andre overlooks is that actually the challenges that face us in the next 30, 40 years cannot be resolved by nation states acting in a purely self-interested, isolated fashion.
Why not?
Let me finish, please.
Why not? Why not?
Challenges
Well,
such
why
as
not?
climate change cannot be resolved, Andre. It's impossible to resolve it in
that's
a
one.
individual
What's your
basis.
What's your second?
Well, you
your
haven't
second point?
contradicted that, have you? So I mean, let's start with that. What's your solution to
Well,
climate change?
first of all-
Is it for
first of all-
every
well-
country to pursue their own self-interest? No, it's not. Unless there is cooperation,
Okay,
Andre.
well, hang on.
We
hang on.
will be. Let me finish, please.
You asked me a question.
Allow me to finish.
You asked me the question
No,
and
you
then
didn't. You
gave me my
interrupted me.
answer.
You interrupted me. Now let me finish. So it's that the whole point about international cooperation, the whole point about regional mechanisms, Andre, is to deal with the huge challenges that face us. I'm afraid isolationism, as we're going to find in the UK, will not further our cause, either in economic terms or climate or welfare, etc.
Well, firstly,
I'm
firstly,
afraid
let me answer
that is the reality of the situation. Fragmentation is
hang
not
on, let
going
me-
to do
let me-
us
let me answer that.
a general good
Let me-
in
let me
the broader
answer-
scheme of things.
Very briefly,
Okay,
Andre.
let me answer that. Point number one, all he mentioned was climate change as an international issue. Point number two, look, what is the little Englander? What is the little European? Is it a Britain that trades across the globe, or is it Fortress Europe, where I have to pay 4% income tariff on my mobile phone, where, you know, garlic is twice as much because we want to support French producers? I believe that what is the little isolationist is a Europe that believes that big government and big corporations and really, really hard-boiled economics is we need a Europe that is free, that is open, that is tariff-free, and the European Union was set up to oppose that. British people do not like big government, and that's why we want out of the European Union.
You just
We've
said
never liked big government.
Sorry, and
Now,
Andre,
the great
you
thing-
just said
the
we
great-
want.
It's very difficult to have a
You
debate
just
with
it's difficult to have a debate if you just talk over people, Andre. You just said we need a Europe which is tariff free. Well, how ridiculous
Yes.
can you come up with that? You're just advocating going out with no deals, which on WTO will
Well,
be
we're
tariffs.
no,
We've
I'm
just
advocating-
left the single
hang on,
market.
hang on.
You want to leave a single market.
I'm advocating.
Let me finish, please.
I'm advocating.
You're
I'm
advocating.
I'm advocating.
You said
You
a
asked
Europe
me the
which
question.
you said
You asked me the question.
One at a time.
I'll give you the answer.
One at a time. Duncan,
You
please.
asked me the question.
Duncan
You
first.
said I want a Europe which is free. I want a Europe which is tariff free. Just for your information, the single market is tariff free.
Yes.
The European Union is based on principles of liberty. So I'm afraid you're
No, it's not.
just.
No, it's
All right,
not.
Douglas Weber. Douglas Weber.
Treaties.
Douglas Weber.
Hang on,
Douglas
hang on,
Weber.
hang on, let me answer this.
One
Let me
has,
answer
the,
this.
one has the impression
Britain-
what Andre
Britain- hang on.
says that
The
the EU is a highly protected market. Exports
Of course it is.
into the EU have an average tariff of roughly 2.3%. These tariffs are very low.
Too high.
The EU has negotiated trade
high.
agreements with other countries around the world, roughly 70 at the present time. So far, in just under 3 years, the UK government succeeded in negotiating the rollover of 7 of these preferential trade agreements, which accounts for roughly 2/3 of all of the EU member states' trade with the rest of the world. I'll read you a list here of some of these countries. Switzerland, quite important, maybe quite small. The Faroe Islands, the Seychelles, Mauritius, Madagascar, Chile, and Zimbabwe. That's not a great achievement in almost 2.5 years, maybe
Well,
because
firstly-
the UK have not got
firstly-
very many trade negotiators
firstly-
because they didn't have any over the last
firstly-
43 years. So they have to
firstly-
recruit some very, very quickly. And I'm worrying about this kind of global,
Well, hang
this
on.
global Britain sort of agenda of the pro-Brexit camp, because if one looks at basically at other countries, is the UK going to negotiate better agreements with them than already have been negotiated by the EU? That seems to be rather unlikely because
Damn right.
the EU is a massive trading bloc.
Damn right.
500 million people. It has
Of
an
course we
enormous
will.
negotiating power with other countries. When the UK negotiates with these countries, with 65 million people in a much smaller market, they're not going to be in quite the same favourable bargaining situation as the EU currently is. So the global Britain
If the
agenda seems to
EU
me
is
to be
such a good-
fairly empty at the end of the day.
If the EU is so good at trade negotiations, why does South Korea have twice as many free trade agreements than the EU? And when I talk about tariffs, listen, I do not believe that I should be paying twice as much for my agricultural products in the shops because we protect French farmers against American agricultural imports. Why the hell do I care how much they're producing in France? The EU butter mountains, all of the waste that goes on, the common agricultural policy, which, by the way, is one of the most obscene and disgusting wastes, I think, in the history of the world. What we need to do, and when I say we should have no tariffs across Europe, it's not, I don't mean within Europe. Of course, I don't want any tariffs within Europe, and I want a free trade deal to deal with that. But what we also should do is stop discriminating against producers outside Europe. You know what? If you've got a small French farm that can't compete with a country in Africa, you know what you should do? Shut it down. Because
All right,
I want cheaper prices in British shops.
Hélène Conway-Bourret.
No, just one thing. Well, maybe in the future, garlic will cost 3 times what you're paying today because there will be customs imposed, which do not today have anything. I just want to say one thing. From what I hear here is a lot of kind of cliches, and maybe governments, and everybody is guilty of that, for years. When something was good, it was, of course, their doing. But when there was something that was not working or that was unpopular but necessary in the countries, it was always the fault of Brussels. And the press has been very negative, and one should not neglect the importance of somebody reading some tabloids in Britain every day of the week that has a page dedicated to be against Europe. I don't know what is behind Mr. Bannon or Mr. Farage. You know, maybe history will tell exactly what their own interests were in the matter of destroying Europe or trying to make it weaker. But I think, you know,
let's move ahead because we're short on time. So I just want to talk about. I just want to talk about what's going to happen next, because we've talked about the possibility of a snap election. We've talked about possibility. You, Duncan Fairgraves and Andre Walker, think it's unlikely that Theresa May's divorce deal will pass. We've talked about the other way to break that gridlock, or in any case, come what may, which is another referendum. Now, on Wednesday, the European Council president acknowledged both Brexit fatigue and the fear that, well, the EU could be seen as abandoning Brits who want to remain.
Before the European Council, I said that we should be open to a long extension if the UK wishes to rethink its Brexit strategy. You cannot betray the 6 million people who signed the petition to revoke Article 50, the 1 million people who marched for a people's vote, or the increasing majority of people who want to remain in the European Union.
Now, Emmanuel Macron's newly designated leader for his party's slate of candidates in upcoming European elections, well, she disagrees when it comes in particular to the concept of a second referendum.
I will tell you one thing. I am personally hostile to a new referendum on Brexit now, because I think this would be a denial of democracy. I think Britain must leave, but it's for them to decide how to.
Do you agree with Nathalie Loiseau?
Yeah, I think it would be offensive to ask the British people a second time. They were asked a question, they answered it, and that's it. I mean, they have a government, they have people who have then to move on and decide on what they will do. I lived in Ireland for a long time, and the Irish people were given referenda to express themselves on, and on 2 occasions they were asked a second time, and I think it is very offensive. So yes, I think Madame Loiseau is right.
Duncan Fairgraves?
I mean, I think there are strong arguments in favour of a second referendum. The first referendum was sold on a false prospectus. I mean, a lot of people have discovered that the reality of the situation in the last couple of years. And I think the position we're in, where we have a political impasse, Parliament, we've seen that in Parliament, we've seen the inability of government to find a way forward. The most logical thing is to go back to the people and ask them their view. And I think that's absolutely justified. And the concept that the government opposes that and nonetheless pushes its withdrawal agreement 3 times on a third occasion tomorrow to the people, and doesn't see to the Parliament, and doesn't see that as a contradiction. I think is problematic.
The Parliament is so deadlocked, Andre Walker, that you do wonder, would a referendum with this time spelling out the either stay in the European Union or approve whatever deal may come out, would that be the way forward?
I think you've got to be genuine and fair here. And this is one thing that I really like about the French politicians who've talked about this. You have to understand now, so much has been said and so much has been done that it would be deeply toxic either to have a second referendum or, frankly, for Britain to remain in the European Union. I compare it to a couple who get divorced or separate and have had a big argument, gone through the courts, and then attempt to get back together. You can never unsay the things that you've said. I just do not believe, as Charles de Gaulle did not believe, that Britain is an appropriate member of the European Union. I don't believe it. I don't think many French people believe it either. And certainly a majority of British people don't believe it. And forget what people are telling you. The numbers in Britain have not changed. British people want to leave.
All right. The polls seem to suggest that, well, it's still pretty mixed, but more people in favor of Remain right now. Of course, it's not election day tomorrow.
That was true before the referendum. The numbers are no different to the day or two the week before the referendum. Look, if there was a second referendum, we'd vote to leave, but it would be even more toxic.
Douglas Weber, in France and in the UK, there's a lot of talk about, and Conway Murray mentioned it when she talked about the Yellow Vests, about the will of the people. What's the will of the people? And, you know, is the parliamentary institutions seem weak? Is a referendum the way to settle this now?
This depends on the constitution and traditions and norms of the country involved. The UK doesn't have a long history of staging referenda, but it has had some in the past, including one on the EU in 1975 already. It's not absurd to have a referendum on major issues of long-term and fundamental importance to the country. But I think in any case, and whether there's a new referendum or not in the UK, I think it's not reprehensible to have the idea of staging a second referendum to present to the British people the terms of a deal for leaving the EU. In this case, they would know basically what they're letting themselves in for, whereas this was not so clear back in June 2016. But in any case, this is going to remain a toxic issue in British politics for a very, very long time, whether a referendum is staged again or not, because the negotiations about the terms of the future relationship between the EU and the UK are going to take place over a very, very long period of time. It's not going to go away.
It's not going to go away. What do you think of that prospect?
I know. Well, I mean, there were 3 years, between the vote and now. I mean, everybody knew that it was going to be a deadline. And what happened during that time? I mean, it was like a denial of what had been voted, of reality, a reality that was going to be difficult to handle. And I'm kind of angry with the people who, at the time, during the campaign, never explained to the British people the result of a Brexit and, the outcomes in economic terms, the Irish border, maybe Scotland, maybe within the Union itself, having tensions that didn't exist before. And none of those subjects were talked about. We had, lies indeed. Nigel Farage, who then said, yes, I lied, and then I go. It's just so easy. So the whole thing is difficult to comprehend. And I just want to reassure our friend André that the French are actually quite sad to see the British people, leaving the EU. I know that it is an island surrounded by water, yes, indeed. But at the same time, there is a link, there is a tunnel now. They were, moved to kind of say, well, look, we all belong to this big continent and we have brought peace. And indeed, I think the British and the French army are the only two that can work together today to, bring security to our continent. Yeah. We have major blocs now. We have the Chinese, we have Russia, we have the United States, and as a continent, we are strong and we're stronger together at 500 million indeed than isolated. So no, we're not happy to see the British go.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. I want to thank you, Hélène Conway-Mouret. I want to thank Douglas Weber, Andre Walker in London, Duncan Fairgrieve. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. Convention. I was going to say, confession time. You can't get away from it. You're glued to it.
I am, unfortunately, but we all are, I suppose. We're all in this together, or not. So you showed that front page of The Guardian earlier, François, with the kind of succession of no's, and that did get quite a lot of traction on social media today. They tried to make Brexit go to rehab. No, 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 no. Right? So
see, I thought of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody.
Actually, I mean, it's the one sort of redemptive quality, I would say, the one redemptive factor with Brexit. It has led to a lot of satire and digging out of lyrics from Britpop all over social media. So that's Amy Winehouse. Also, this is the Irish Border, which has become a kind of a very successful Twitter account, the sort of humanised version that speaks on Twitter. They're going to have to finally choose between Blur and Oasis, aren't they? And it sort of goes on like that. So that's the extension to continue with the Britpop references. Elsewhere, a lot of comments too on Theresa May's falling on her sword yesterday, or at least falling on her sword in the hope that it would rally enough votes for a withdrawal agreement 3. So I understand the situation. If I understand the situation correctly, Theresa May doesn't have enough support to resign successfully. And the Poke, which is another satire account, Theresa May throws herself under the bus and misses. So, I mean, the beleaguered Prime Minister, I suppose, she's getting quite a lot of grief online with that sort of stuff. Also, one of her potential successors, of course, who has his weekly column in the Daily Telegraph. 24 hours is a long time in British politics right now. And we saw 2 days ago, if we vote for the Prime Minister's lamentable withdrawal agreement, we are skewered. 24 hours later, why I will back Theresa May's deal. That also got quite a degree of comment.
Man of principle.
Quite a lot of reaction online for that as well. What about the chance to become Prime Minister within weeks? What about the chance of becoming Prime Minister within weeks? First attraction Boris Johnson to the idea of backing a Brexit deal he spent months condemning. I think a lot of people really did find this quite perplexing, the fact that you could crash something for months and then shift your position, perhaps because you could benefit from that shift. Plot twist in which Moses gets the opportunity to apply for the position of Pharaoh and suddenly isn't so sure about leading the Jews out of slavery anymore. So, yes, a lot of questioning about Boris Johnson's sincerity in terms of political positioning on social media. What else do we have? And then there was one of the votes, of course, of the 8 indicative votes yesterday. We will get to today as well, but just to kind of lead up to it, was whether or not a second referendum should take place. Now, even though it was a reverse result, guess what the ratio was? The breakdown of the vote for a second referendum tonight was 52 to 48.
Right.
And so a lot of people really found that just really too much to handle altogether. And there were various comments about that, about that sort of sad irony that you can't get away from that figure. Now, of course, it is a very serious matter. EU moves into crisis mode as it plans for a no-deal Brexit. And that's what this is an article that was published just a couple of hours back. Ambassadors openly talking on the terms to be set for the bloc to return to negotiating tables. In other words, all-out preparations right now for no deal. That's what we're looking at. I'll just finish with two. You're getting a lot of hate speech, I would say, on social media towards parliamentarians right now. People are absolutely sick to their teeth of this in the UK and I think elsewhere. The Brexit betrayal, House of Treason and Traitors. My sentiments exactly all of Parliament, ma'am? Yes, 007, the whole bloody lot. So there's a real sense that
promo video for the Olympics is getting a lot of mileage.
Indeed, that too. People have had enough, but it's not over yet.
Not over yet, indeed, and we're glued to it again. I confess it. Many thanks for that, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.